Thanks so much, Mackenzie, and thanks so much to all of the organizations that are helping make this happen, and a particular thanks to Congressman Kilmer for making this conversation real with us with the exceptional bill that has been introduced, the Building Civic Bridges Act. At Convergence, uh, we do bridging in a particular way. We bring leaders together who are in somewhere between opposition and enmity with each other on particular issues. We help them build trust with each other, and then from that place of trust to engage in collaborative dialogue until they're able to find consensus proposals for these issues that are stuck. And we're finding that in this moment of incredible polarization in the country, that a lot of the skills and approaches, methodologies that we use are very applicable and practical in lots of other settings, from Congress to the public to lots of other organizations. And so hopefully, Janan will have an opportunity to talk about some of those institutions and sectors that it's relevant to. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Mackenzie and team, for putting this event together. Really happy to be here. My name is Janan Mohajer. I'm the Senior Director of Special Projects at Interfaith America. Interfaith America is a national nonprofit based out of Chicago that works to bring together, or works to equip, connect, and bring together leaders and institutions to really think about how bridge building can be an asset to our civic fabric, and how those skills of leadership, for us, some of that focus is not specifically on religious leadership, but also broader leadership across other kinds of difference as well, in thinking about how to build a cohesive common good. So we're really excited to be here, and really excited to be partnering with many of you, and also to see the future of this bill go forward, because it is so important for this particular moment in our country and our communities.
So, John, let's jump in.
Yeah.
When you look at, let's talk about government first as the key institution. When you saw this bill introduced by Representative Kilmer, and then he was able to build bipartisan co-sponsorship, 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats, and then it was introduced in a bipartisan way in the Senate. Did that feel, yeah, that's how Congress is generally approaching bridging? Or did it feel like, wow, this is we've really turned a corner here?
I think it was indicative of what opportunities are actually possible, right? Like what kind of work is actually possible to do across deep differences. And we know that government has some of the deepest differences at this moment in our particular recent history. And also to think about how we really connect the civic sector to the vision of what it looks like to do bridge building work. And I think the bill does that in a very direct way by engaging bridge building at the AmeriCorps level, and really thinking about how can we have a generation of leaders who are going through these this important experience and in immersive communities, and how can we bring additional skills so that those bridge building skills are not just important to them in that particular engagement, in that particular time of their young adult life, but also beyond that, and beyond that into other professions that they go into. And that sort of has this cascading effects throughout society. And the fact that the bill exists means that our government is coming together to actually invest in something that has a positive cascade moment. So for me, that was the most exciting part. What about you, David? What did you think when you saw this?
Well, one of the things that I've learned through a lot of this work is how, when you talk about institutions, what you're really talking about is people. And when we bring, for example, a leader of a labor union together with the leader of a company, it's pretty quick. It pretty quickly gets to the point where you're really dealing with these human beings finding ways to trust each other, reach out to each other. And Congress is no different. I think this bill is pretty unique for Congress. I haven't seen much in the way of Congress doing this, but it wasn't surprising seeing Representative Kilmer do it. Representative Kilmer has for years been really a leader in building inside Congress bipartisanship and collaboration. His work with the Select Committee on Modernization of Congress, his work with the bipartisan working group. So for me, this was just another sort of precedent busting activity toward bridging and toward collaboration that Representative Kilmer helped, but seeing growing support in Congress, that's really gratifying.
Absolutely. And I think in sitting or following that momentum, even if we look at the recent United We Stand event that was hosted by the White House, and Interfaith America was very lucky to be part of that conversation, and are working closely with this new initiative called Nation of Bridge Builders, which is in partnership with the YMCA and also with Habitat for Humanity. And that's that's a great example of also the kinds of things that a bill like this can inspire, both within its sector, but also outside of it, right? So this is a new initiative that's bringing people to, and actually we just got word that, Catholic Charities might be interested in joining too. So it's interesting to see how a conversation like this that is sparked by this sort of legislation can also have reverberations and can build and have other fruit that come out of the labor of doing this work. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're seeing is, and this is really connected to the White House's initiative, the Agency of AmeriCorps, even ahead of receiving this bill, is taking a lot of steps toward bringing bridge building skills, core ways of listening, that we can listen to each other, that we can understand each other without judging, that we can find ways to collaborate without feeling like we need to compromise core values. All of these skills, the new director of AmeriCorps, Michael Smith, is saying this is going to be core to how the agency moves forward. And so we're really delighted by that. And Janan, we were so delighted to see Interfaith America building this initiative and finding ways to be training 10,000 participants with Habitat and with Catholic Charities. Who was the third?
YMCA.
YMCA, which actually, as Congressman Kilmer may share, was one of the impetuses for a lot of this work. So I've also seen the service sector and the institutions there really caring a lot about bridging. We've had conversations with everyone from the Red Cross to City Year and others, including the folks you're working with. And there's this very broad sense that if the service sector can effectively incorporate bridge building skills, they'll be able to better accomplish their service goals. This isn't a matter of them having mission creep or deciding they're going to do things other than what their missions call for. This is a matter of finding ways for bridging to actually make service happen more strongly. So that's a sector that, and of course, it's important to keep in mind that nonprofits and these volunteer organizations get very significant tax benefits because they're driving public interest. And so that's another important reason to be able to expect them to be helping us with polarization.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the other piece of that that's resonating with me from what you were saying, David, is that oftentimes the bridge building skills, not oftentimes, I mean, it's been my experience that when you bring in bridge building skills into a service space, what you're really giving people is a way to actually connect with the work that they're doing on a much deeper and personal level. So it is not that you're stepping into a space as as someone who's just there for a time limited experience where you're giving something to the community, but you're also receiving something from the community that you're in partnership with, that you're in relationship with. And that's, that's really, I think, one of the most important parts of bridge building, is being able to give people a way to connect through service, but also through deep listening, active listening, through storytelling, through being able to facilitate hard conversations when you disagree with someone, and still being able to show grace and understanding for who they are as humans. So I think that's, what that's really resonating with me in terms of what you were talking about, in how the service sector is really stepping up to do this work.
Another sector that's really, it's more of a patchwork, but elements of it are really moving forward, is the philanthropic community and those institutions. We saw recently the New Pluralists. At the same time you made the commitment around with those three organizations, the New Pluralists increased their commitment from driving $100 million into the pluralism space. They're now looking at $1 billion, catalyzing $1 billion over 10 years coming into this space. That's a pretty hefty commitment. And when you really look at what it's going to take for America to overcome toxic polarization, it's really a tip of an iceberg, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that was also a really exciting moment for me in seeing this work kind of to build into that. So as you have been doing this for a long time, Interfaith America has been doing this for a long time as well. And it's really taken a number of years for this kind of commitment, both in the philanthropic sector, but also in the service sector, to really think about how bridge building is really important in sustaining relationships between different communities, between people of different ideologies, different religious or racial or other kinds of identities, but also in terms of thinking about what is the vision that we want to build of a cohesive, collective America, and how does America live into its promise. That promise won't be actualized without the skills of bridge building present, in order to have that kind of community building and conversation that we need to have, specifically in today's moment of high polarization. I think another sector that comes to mind as we think about how bridge building work needs to really become normative, it needs to become a norm in other spaces as well, is really thinking about the corporate and business spaces, and how I know, you have done a lot of this work, David, so would love to hear kind of your experiences in this sector as well. And this is, a place that Interfaith America is beginning to grow our sort of format and curriculum, et cetera. But would love to hear from you in terms of the work that you're already doing in this space, David.
Terrific. I'll just reply quickly to Scott that the bill that we're talking about is the Building Civic Bridges Act that was introduced by Congressman Derek Kilmer. I think that the business space and the corporate space have a strong appetite to figure this out, but we're not seeing as much progress as hopefully we ultimately will. There's a set of connected issues that a lot of businesses are getting pushed on by their employees, by cause activists, by politicians of all sides, that include these questions. What's the role that business is going to play in trying to preserve, protect, further strengthen our democracy? And then they also have questions that they've been very responsive to in the last several years about how to be better engaging questions of equity and justice, and in particular, dealing with their internal work around diversity, inclusion, and equity. And trying to expand those questions into how do we deal with bridge building is something that a lot of folks haven't sort of figured out. And And in particular, there's this really strong challenge that more businesses are beginning to face about their employees being polarized, sometimes their C-suite not being able to work together, seeing polarization among their customers, and then also seeing really dysfunctional levels of polarization in the communities in which businesses operate. So I'm seeing a lot of appetite, not yet a whole lot of progress, although there are organizations like Walmart that have jumped in very early on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's also that I would imagine that there's also a lot of hesitancy to engage it because of the public controversy that it might generate, or because of the kind of conflict that it might generate, you know, either between employees or other ways. So I think this is really important work, and we're definitely seeing that more people are leaned in and they're hoping to engage and are trying to figure out what is the right fit, what's the right way to kind of bring this into the business and corporate spaces. And I think one way that you're mentioning towards the end of your comments there is also, you know, how corporations can actually, through their philanthropic spaces, invest in this work. And therefore it becomes this cyclical formula where they're able to invest. And then that obviously brings it into the communities that they serve and into their customer base as well. So, yeah.
So Ben asked, I think, a really powerful question. You know, what are the thoughts on addressing how media companies influence on public opinion? And you know, from my perspective, Amanda Ripley uses this term conflict entrepreneur, and I think that's a pretty apt. We see a lot of politicians that are trying to win on an issue or win an election, effectively using wedging as a way to succeed short term. But wedging, of course, is, you know, you can win the battle and lose the war with that. We're also seeing a lot of media playing this unfortunate entrepreneurial role, because they know that the more controversy that they build, the more that they can focus on divisiveness. They tend to believe that they get more eyeballs, and which ends up improving their profits and giving them the ability to charge more for advertising. So it's really a challenge. Do you have ideas, Janan, on dealing with some of the conflict entrepreneurs, and in particular the media?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is sort of Interfaith America's bread and butter in terms of thinking about how story can really help change and push a different view of someone. And I think partially for me, it's really important to think about, you know, how are we engaging the media, both in sort of the mainstream, you know, big media, but also in personal small ways, because all of us in some ways are part of this conversation on our social media channels, and we're able to drive that ourselves as well. So how are we also furthering stories, and how are we telling our own stories and telling the stories of the communities that we're from or that we are in relationship with, in ways that really thinks about or thinks through the world with this lens of bridge building, and what are the possibilities instead of looking at what are the impossibilities. And that's really, I think, a shift for us, because let's be honest, conflict can be very sexy, right? It can sell. And I think partially we have to reframe ourselves to think about how we talk about a community, a person, an issue through the lens of what is possible to do here instead of what is impossible to do here. And I'll tell a really funny anecdote that's just happened in my house yesterday. My 11-year-old, who is sort of news savvy, sort of comes up to me and asks me who I'm going to vote for in a particular election that's going to happen in the midterms here in Illinois. And I was kind of like, why are you asking? And he's just like, well, I just want to know who you're going to vote for. And I was like, well, I usually vote for this person. And he was like, well, good, because the other person doesn't do anything for this issue and this issue. And I was just like, do you know that for certain, or did somebody tell you that? And he was like, well, no, I saw it on an ad on TikTok, right? So,
Right.
and that's essentially how people are forming their opinions. And of course, political ads have a certain role to play in our politics. We all know that. And I think we need to be thinking about how do we actually cultivate authentic narratives of connection and belonging and healing in a time where polarization is ripping us apart. And that is a responsibility that I know that we individually have through our social media channels, but also how are we thinking about that? And I would urge people to look at Interfaith America Magazine, which is our own sort of web platform where we're sharing a lot of these stories. So take a look and hopefully you'll find something that
Well, I
resonates
will
with you.
look at that. And Janan, that's a good segue back to Mackenzie. We're in the unfortunate position of being in the way of people getting to hear from Congressman Kilmer. And I just want to note how much I'm looking forward to hearing this and how much it's meant for so many colleagues in the bridge building community that we have this bill in Congress and that we have an ongoing opportunity to be storytelling about how collaboration can move in Congress. With that, Mackenzie, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, David and Janan. What